Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver. It's not a good movie. In fact, it's even worse than Part 1. I'm not going to do a full review of the movie, and I'm not going to do a rewrite. I did that when Part 1 came out, and there will be a link to that video in the description below in case you missed it. In this video, I will be talking about a couple scenes, in particular, the background stories of each character that is given to us. The characters were barely known to us in Part 1, with the most basic and barest of backstories, and most of what we're told about these characters in Part 1 is told to us by Admiral Noble when he captures them. In Part 2, though, the Moon Hero 6 give us their backstories straight from the horse's mouth, except Gunnar, because he's just a boring farmer. And aside from this person, each backstory makes the character worse. When you, as a writer, need to get your character's backstory across to the audience, don't have your characters just sitting at a table on the eve of battle, doing nothing to prepare for the fight, and then have them just randomly decide, hey, we should all know about each other, so we're going to deliver our backstories, one right after the other, without a pause, taking no questions at this time. And each of us is going to deliver our lines in a monotone voice, with no passion or the barest inkling of what we're feeling as we recount our tales of woe. Now keep in mind as we go into this backstory scene that Noble already summed up each person when he caught them in Part 1, and they all heard what he said. And yet, the only person to ask questions about what Noble said is Gunnar. After he and Kora decide they can't wait to talk about their feelings anymore, these two characters, who were totally not attracted to each other in Part 1, decide to do the hanky-panky, and afterward, they're watching the stars, or the ceiling. And Gunnar decides that this is the best time to ask Kora to elaborate on what Noble meant by her being the most wanted criminal in the galaxy, and Kora reveals all. She knew about the assassination plot on the royal family. She was in on it. Her job was to kill the princess. In Part 1, Kora talked about the princess like she had been the most wonderful, amazing person in Kora's life. Magical, able to bring the dead back to life, special. Kora talked as though she were absolutely gutted when the princess had been killed, but now we find that Kora pulled the trigger. Kora killed the princess, who had been set to bring in an era of peace. Now yes, we learn at the end of the movie that the princess is still alive. Somehow. But sadly, Gunnar doesn't live to hear this, so he believes Kora killed a child. And not just any child, but this really, really important child. And he takes it about as well as Padme did when Anakin admitted he wiped out a whole Tusken Raider clan, women and children too. Now, Kora says she went along with her adopted dad's plan because she could never betray him, never disobey him, and she thought he would protect her. But surprise, surprise, he pins the royal family murders on her, and she is forced to flee for her life. Oh, poor Kora. If only she hadn't forgotten how evil Belisarius was. If only she hadn't forgotten how he killed her family and invaded her planet. If only she hadn't forgotten how her first love was killed in battle and how it made her feel. Maybe if she had remembered, she would have warned the king and queen about the assassination. You know, gather some evidence and show the king. Since all the senators are there, then there must be communication log or something she could use to convince the king his loyal general is not so loyal. But no, you see, Kora is the victim, groomed from childhood to be a soldier, and loyal to the man who destroyed her world. She could never even think of betraying him until he betrayed her. Yeah, no, she's not a victim, guys. Having witnessed the princess's magical ability for herself, Kora knew the princess would have been capable of bringing peace to the galaxy, of ending the king's and Belisarius' crazed campaign to conquer the galaxy. If you want to garner sympathy from the audience for a character, this is not the way to do it. Kora doesn't even try to make amends for all the wrong she has done until her hand is forced in Part 1. She lived for 2 years on the moon, farming, and was going to leave them when they were in trouble without a backwards glance. This is our hero, ladies and gentlemen. The person who kills unarmed medics and coal shovelers, who could be slaves for all we know, and yet the more that is revealed of her past and her own actions in Part 2, just paint her as this horrible person whom, for some reason, everyone is cool with at the end of the movie, despite the fact she admits she killed the princess. But Titus is like, nah, you didn't kill her, it's all cool. As for the other backstories, as I said earlier, they're sitting around this table, and Titus stands up and quietly demands attention. He says he's not good at making confessions, but he thinks it's important that they all know who they are going into battle with, and so they should all tell each other the truth. He goes first. Now we know from part 1 that Titus rebelled against the Motherworld, surrendered, and his troops were murdered. Well, Titus reveals that he was ordered to open fire on this planet that had just voted to leave the Empire, but he refused, and his ship was shot down. He and his troops crawled from the wreckage to fight the Motherworld's troops until their ammo was all spent. So Titus struck a deal, surrendering his life in exchange for his soldiers to be spared. Only Belisarius didn't honor that deal and showed no mercy, killing Titus's troops right in front of him, and somehow not incinerating Titus or the Motherworld soldiers as well. Titus says that not a day goes by without him thinking about his men and how he will never surrender, never again. Sure, man, that's why you were drinking your life away in a crummy Colosseum ruin on some backwater planet. Now I ask you, what about Titus's backstory shows that he's a good general? Kora built this man up in part 1 as an excellent general, having a great strategic mind, etc., and yet, by his own admission, Titus had no plan when he defied the order to fire on the planet, Sarah World. Open fire! No! And Titus' ship is shot down, just like that. He and his surviving soldiers fight until they have no ammo left and then surrender. Now, given the fact that Titus had been in the Motherworld military long enough to reach the rank of general, knew Belisarius, what did he think was going to happen when he defied his orders? Nothing in this story shows that Titus is a good leader, the kind of man they need to defend this farming village from the Empire. Next we have Lieutenant Milius. This character didn't have a name in part 1, and only a couple lines. Her backstory is short, extended through the use of slow motion of course, but she admits to never having fought in a battle like the one they face tomorrow. So what have the rebels been doing up to this point? No idea. Anyway, the Empire came to her world, enslaved her people, and then the rebellion showed up at the slave camp she was in, and she was liberated, joining their ranks. There's not a whole lot to talk about here. She's just another character who once lived a peaceful life before the Empire came. And for some reason, she's a member of Moon Hero 6, filling Darius Bloodaxe's shoes instead of Darius' sister, who, not having been mentioned the whole movie except by Jimmy Hopkins in the beginning prologue, shows up at the end of the movie to save the day. I would like to point out, in this flashback scene, you can see some poor slaves getting injured and possibly killed by the very rebels who are there to liberate them. We then go to Nemesis' backstory. She used to live in a fishing village. Her people were peaceful, but there was a time they weren't. And so, after her village was destroyed, Nemesis digs up a box, in what I assume is the wreckage of her home, and takes out these 2 swords. These not lightsabers are so hot that you need special robot gauntlets to wield them. Unless you're Kora or Gunner, and then you can just use some cloth to protect your hands. And Nemesis cuts off her own arms to attach these gauntlets, which must have the ability to prevent infection from setting in because Nemesis has no medical supplies around, doesn't sterilize anything before operating on herself. Nope, she slices off limbs and becomes part robot. Nemesis says she never killed anyone before, never spilled blood until she spilled her own. And that blood awakened the bloodlust of her ancestors in the gauntlets, and they taught her how to fight. She became a creature of revenge. And she ends her story saying, "And yes, I will kill them." Okay, so we have a lot to unpack here. First, Nemesis doesn't mention her children being killed by the Motherworld. We got that information from Noble in part 1. But Nemesis talks about her pain and rage, her revenge, and yet, if we didn't know her kids had been killed, we would think this rage and revenge was just centered around her village being destroyed. Now, I have no problem with the not lightsabers being so hot you can't wield them without special gauntlets. But don't have one character have to go to the extreme of slicing off her own arms to wield these things, while another character can just wrap some cloth around her hands and wield the sword just fine. So instead, why not have it be special gloves? That way, Kora can steal a pair off someone and wield the sword that way. And you also don't need Nemesis mutilating herself. But then, how could the bloodlust of her ancestors teach her how to fight? That's another thing. What hocus pocus is this? The bloodlust of her ancestors is in the gauntlets and it is awakened by her blood? Does this mean the sword is powered by blood? Can't be, because of the Kora example mentioned earlier. So why is their ancestor bloodlust in the gauntlets, and why does Nemesis' blood awaken it? Also, how does that bloodlust teach Nemesis how to fight? What bunkum is this, and what plank wrote it? Also, in part 1, Nemesis lectured the others about revenge and how seeking it could cause you to wind up dead in a gutter on some forgotten planet. But when she's done telling her story, she says, I became a creature of revenge, and yes, I will kill them. So, is revenge cool again? Why exactly is Nemesis here again? Moving on to the last, Tarak, the Tarzan of rebel Moonians, the tamer of griffins. He was an indentured servant in part 1. When we met him, he owed a lot of money to a rancher, and he stayed willingly in chains to pay off his debt. And then we learned from Noble that he was a prince. So, how did he go from prince to slave? Everybody buckle in. This is gonna be good, I can tell.
None of us get to choose our parents.
Wait, none of us get to choose our parents? Usually when someone says this, it means they didn't like their parents because for whatever reason, you resent your parents. They didn't raise you right, they weren't the best, maybe they didn't treat you right. But then Tarak says,
Mine happened to be a king and queen.
Okay, so did you not like how they raised you? Do you not like being a prince? What? Oh, look, a griffin!
My father, the king, insisted on presenting our terms to the armies of the Motherworld himself. And their answer was to return his body with the promise of invasion.
So the king went to the armies of the Motherworld to deliver his terms. Terms of what? Surrender? Defiance? A treaty? Was he changing his Happy Meal order for the 90th time? Whatever the terms, the Motherworld no lucky. So they kill the king and send him back to his people with the promise of invasion, giving the royal family and the Victorian dressed people time to hold a funeral for the dead king. Okay, that king was stupid. What leader goes by himself to the enemy to deliver terms that he has to know an empire like the bloodthirsty Motherworld isn't going to like hearing? They could have held him hostage and forced his world to kneel, but instead, they went with instant death, and then are nice enough to return his body with a heads up, we're going to invade.
My mother told me then, a boy doesn't become a man until his father dies.
Wait, what?
My mother told me then, a boy doesn't become a man until his father dies.
A boy doesn't become a man until his father dies? So, to all the guys watching this video, if you be in your 20s, 40s, 60s, or more, if your father is still alive, you are not a man yet. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. You've been lied to. Also, you have been unjustly taxed, and your boss is guilty of child labor. Now, Tarak finishes the line by saying,
And a prince becomes a king.
So, a boy does not become a man until his father dies, and a prince a king. The only thing true in this statement is the prince becoming a king, which doesn't happen until the current king dies or steps down. But this whole a boy doesn't become a man until his father dies is a bunch of malarkey. Hold it. Please tell me the griffins are not the only thing on this planet defending it. Guys, I know the sandworms in Dune were essential to the story and played a significant role, but that is not happening here. We are given no rhyme or reason as to why these griffin things are here.
But Shammy, have you considered how cool they look?
Yes, I did. And guess what? I still don't like it. Why are you guys just standing here? Who's overseeing the defenses? Who is seeing your people to safety?
My mother, for honor's sake, she would not run. I wanted to stay to protect her, but the queen knew to preserve the bloodline and the throne. I lost my mother and my world that day.
Okay, so if we had just heard this story from Tarak, without the flashback footage, we would have thought what? That his mother was killed during the attack, right? But what actually happens is so much darker, and honestly, I'm not sure if this makes Tarak worse than Kora. Tarak says he wanted to protect his mom, but his words do not match his actions. He is just standing there, looking sadly at his mother, while she sadly looks back at him. And he continues to just stand there. No words are said. He doesn't beg her not to do it. He stays there silently, while his mother stands up on the balcony railing and commits Sudoku. He does nothing. I wanted to protect my mother. You liar! You heartless, cowardly liar. You are a big, strong man. Pick your mother up, put her over your shoulder, and run out of there. Don't just stand there and let your mother die needlessly, stupidly. You have time! Run over there and save her!
I lost my mother and my world that day.
I don't care. I don't care anymore about this character. Not that I cared much before, because of how little we knew of him in part 1, but now any interest has been reduced to 0. What a scumbag. What a stupid, namby-pamby scumbag.
I was smuggled off planet, hidden in a refugee transport, headed for a near-bred star.
I ran for duty's sake, for the preservation of a kingdom and a bloodline that no longer exists.
Yeah, it does. Well, your kingdom may no longer exist, but the bloodline does. It's you. You are the last of your bloodline. It exists in you.
I was robbed of my opportunity to defend them. But no more. When we finish here, that is where I'll go. Home. To atone for that
Mistake of misplaced honor.
Let me
Leave
in!
him, Sherry! He's not worth it! Jammy! No!
What happens next is kind of funny. Titus asks Kora for her backstory, not knowing that Gunnar bought the exclusive rights to that back in part 1. So Kora lies about how involved she was with the Empire. Titus looks like he thinks she's lying, but even though he wanted everyone to tell the truth, he lets it slide. Only to reveal at the end of the movie that he knew the whole time. So why he lets her get away with this here, letting her continue to believe she killed the magical princess, when surely giving hopeful news of the princess's continued survival would have been just what the Moon Hero 6 needed to hear to bolster them going into battle, is anyone's guess. So what did we learn about these characters? Well, she shows no regret at shooting a child, and is a liar. He's a horrible general. She's here. She is fueled by ancestor bloodlust, and he is a weak-willed nincompoop. Also, Gunnar's okay dating a child murderer. The last thing I want to talk about is the violinist and cello player who are wearing hoods during the assassination scene. I've only seen this in media once before, in an old Sherlock Holmes episode, A Scandal in Bohemia. In there, the orchestra is blindfolded because the prince is having an affair with this woman, and this way the orchestra can't cause a scandal by giving the woman's name to the press. Little did the prince know that the person he needed to fear raising a scandal was the woman herself, because she did not care for being cast aside when the prince has to actually get married. Beware a woman scorned, guys. Now, why are the players hooded in this scene? The king and queen are not alarmed at seeing them wearing hoods, so it must be normal in the rebel moondom. Perhaps the players are also hooded so that they are not witnesses to the assassination, but they play perfectly, without missing a beat, as the tempo changes and the king and queen are being stabbed, the princess shot. The players know exactly what to do throughout the whole scene. So either they can see through the hoods, or that's just how the piece actually goes and everyone else is just moving in time with the music. Also, the players are witnesses to the assassination because, while they can't see, they can hear, and they can hear Belisarius order Kora to shoot the princess. So they must be loyal to the general, or they're all dying after the scene. Now, how this scene should have gone, if the players in the corner just absolutely had to be there. Have them screech to a halt in their playing when the shouting starts, or when the queen yells at Issa to run. Then they sit there trembling in fear as the king and queen are stabbed, the princess shot, Kora shooting the other guards. The players sit there, frozen, too scared to move, fearing their fate. Then, when Belisarius turns on Kora, have the soundtrack slowly pick up, tension rising, but the players in the corner remain frozen in fear. When Kora runs, have Belisarius order her immediate capture, and either one of the players drops their bow or the general looks in their direction, suddenly remembers they're there, and motions to one of the soldiers who just enter. End scene. Frankly, I wouldn't have had the players there at all, but if they must be there, have them act like real people who have suddenly realized they are going to die and there's no escape. Don't have them continue playing to the beat of what's happening, because 1, they shouldn't be able to do it perfectly without sight, and 2, it robs the scene of any seriousness. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. See you in the comments below. My thanks to Sir Baller from the Knights of Baller channel for joining me in this video, and may you all find a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Farewell.